Today, it's my pleasure to introduce Jeanine Oleson, a transdisciplinary artist whose work includes performances, books, writing, and installations that usually involve video and sculptural objects. Jeanine has had solo exhibitions and performances at Cubitt Gallery in London, Hammer Museum in Los Angeles, Commonwealth and Council in Los Angeles, the New Museum of Contemporary Art here in New York, Exit Art, which was a fantastic nonprofit arts venue here in New York, Monya Rowe Gallery in New York, and a terrific gallery that ran for several years in Boston called Samson Projects. Her work has been included in group exhibitions at the Coreana Museum in Seoul, South Korea, Atlanta Contemporary in Atlanta, SculptureCenter in New York, Pierogi in New York, Beta Local in San Juan, Puerto Rico, Grand Arts, which used to be in Kansas City and I think is now in L.A.
Yeah, I think the next generation.
Yeah. Anyway, they were great in Kansas City, Missouri. Socrates Sculpture Park over in Long Island City. Diverseworks, an amazing place that's still going strong in Houston, Texas. L.A.C.E, which is Los Angeles Contemporary Exhibitions. Art in General in New York. May it rest in peace. Participant Inc., still going strong in the Lower East Side. MoMA PS1 here in New York. The Havana Biennale in Havana, Cuba. And White Columns just down in the West Village. Jeanine's work has been supported by the Rema Hort Mann Foundation, Creative Capital, the Puffin Foundation, Foundation for Contemporary Art, Franklin Furnace, the Jerome Foundation, the Brooklyn Arts Council, and the College Art Association, as well as the American Academy in Rome. She's done residencies in Rome and also at Boffo on Fire Island, MacDowell in Peterborough, New Hampshire, Urban Glass in Brooklyn, and Smack Mellon in Brooklyn. Jeanine is currently Associate Professor of Sculpture and Graduate Director in the Department of Art and Design at Rutgers University. That's the Mason Gross School. She's also taught at Parsons, Skowhegan, Sarah Lawrence, and MICA. She's a lead collaborator on Photo Requests from Solitary, which is a participatory project that provides requested images to people held in solitary confinement and supports advocacy efforts to end the practice of solitary confinement in U.S. prisons. Jeanine received a BFA from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, where she got to know Nelson Santos, an MFA from Rutgers, and she also attended the Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Jeanine Oleson.
There's my life flashed before my eyes. Thank you so much for being here. It's kind of fun now that I'm the graduate director at Rutgers. I'm like, oh yeah, we have a lecture series too. And you know, it's not one that I participate in, but it's really great to be in a room with another group of MFA students and who are thinking about their work seriously. And basically, I'll start. I have given a talk for a while in a more linear way, so this is going to be fun, and I'm going to keep an eye on my time. Yeah, can you hear me? Yes. Okay. Yeah. If you have any questions as I go, please feel free to just ask. No problem. You want me to move the microphone up? Is that what that was? Or are you just making gestures at me, Nelson? Basically, I would say I've been working fairly seriously as a visual artist for 25 years, which is, you know, I hate to use the word journey, but it is kind of a journey to be an artist. And over time and over the sort of ebbs and flows of what's happening in the world and in your work. But I work in sculpture, performance, film, video, sound, and installation work. I sort of work across disciplines too. I often work in theatrical contexts or with musicians and sort of experimental music contexts as well. I'm really committed to cross-disciplinary research, and I care for both deeply conceptual ideas and material processes. And I think of these things as having an ethical underbody and concepts remain rooted to sort of philosophical inquiries into the body senses, but also the materials that surround us in the world. I think also I've been thinking a lot recently in the effects on the kind of post-Enlightenment framework of Western thought, and how this enters my work as everything from like references to Western imperialism to like how contemporary bodies are living in the world between space and materials and virtuality, which we'll see that. I'm a voracious generalist. I really like to learn things, figure things out. Every project changes materially, it changes, but you see sort of extended motifs, but I'm not a person that sort of continues to work in the same physical and material way. Maybe you disagree. I'm curious. You know, I've been working for a long time and I can't talk about everything. So I will talk about some things, but I am not going to be able to talk about Monsanto in the Arctic and negative articulation. I'm not going to be able to talk about the world's largest sage smudge stick. I'm not going to be able to talk about Ronald Reagan's natal chart as a sand painting. Not going to be able to talk about talk shows I've done about translation and Wagner. I'm not going to be able to talk about queerness and the death of romantic ideals. I'm not going to be able to talk about arias and the problems of communication, or the tenderness of community projects against gentrification, or retribution against patriarchal structures for unicorns. But I can tell you about a few significant projects that are from past like 10, 12 years. This is a production still of a cave in New Mexico. That's something I've shot at like 3 different times. And it kind of stands in as a marker for thinking and looking beyond certain Western philosophical traditions, Plato, and as a reminder of the material and bodily experiences that are interacted upon one another. And I'm also really interested in how unstable knowledge is. What is knowledge? My work is marked by an interest in the conflict between contemporary life and the material conditions of living, sort of Marxist abstraction. But I think through this research and craft to complete and sort of intertwined bodies of work. Somewhere between my hand and my head, I always think is where I come to understand what I'm doing. Often it's performative, and this kind of results in different kinds of responses for that I'm trying to elicit in the work, where it's somewhere between working with performers and keeping them in confusion, or sometimes working to produce forms of pleasure, both for myself and also hopefully for the viewer. I work with scripts and librettos, and my sources range sort of in language of business newsletters to delusional art speak to choirs based on G8 speeches. And it's all a means of working with what we're living with in the world today. Let's see. It wants to access that. I'm going to say allow. Yeah. So I've also focused on activities like singing, language, and I always think about things that are both really serious, but then the absurdity of living in the world. And I think a lot about sort of ocular centric, how we've been taught to think so much through what we see, when in fact there's other sensory experiences which are often cut off. So this is just a little loop from a video that was used in an installation from a couple of years ago. I have the brilliant Ajay Manthripragada, who's an architectural theorist. And while all of these things are serious, that I'm into, I'm also really focused on what I do has to do with humor, and it has to do with play. So I'm just going to show you some excerpts of different things. And, you know, it's kind of wild to have been working seriously for 25 years. And, you know, being an artist is a really long game. That's all I can say. So buckle up. This is a project I did. This was a poster for a project at the new museum, and it was called Here, Here, like here and here. I love puns. You will see that over and over again. Like it's just a way to deal with meaning and destabilize meaning a little bit. I always think humor and destabilize. But this project was at the new museum. It's like I lived there for 6 months. I had an exhibition. I did a series of public programs and workshops. We had a reading seminar, and I did 2 performances. It's a project I did with the amazing curator, John Burton, who's now at the ICA in Philadelphia. And this project was about sort of linguistically uniting the sensory and the locational and thinking about voice, but then also about like hearing and how you respond to what's around you and how what are the kind of possibilities of transforming the situations of exhibitions and performances. So this was just the publication, which I got really into this idea of folding and worked with a great designer, Tiffany Malacuti, to sort of expose the writing. It's the beginning of the exhibition. It was obviously staged kind of like a theater. And I wanted the audience to think about walking in and then going from being what would be an audience to crossing the fourth wall, or that invisible barrier that separates you from performers on traditional stages on prosceniums. So I was sort of interested in that right away, and you'll see all the ways that the work does that. This was a print that was in the beginning. I thought of it as a kind of as a trifold print, and it's photo intaglio. And it has this kind of like touch, then the voice as a mechanism. And that's a vocal cord in the middle, which I loved the extant humor there, and then someone coming up out of a cave in the ground. And I thought of it as kind of a map for the show. And then once you come through the curtains, there's this series of objects that sort of are paradoxical forms of the body, a lot of, or some of them, and they are also objects that were made for performance. So at some point in the show, I did almost like body marks, like as if it was forensics, and then everything was down in the theater for about a week. So this is the interior of this cave, this cave, or this mountain that's also a cave, and it's called Mountain Cave. And there's a spotlight in there. That was all handmade felt. Like I wanted this idea of like the felt would just kind of envelop and change the sound if you went inside of it. It just cuts the vibration. And this is a light called Oculite. It has a Fresnel lens on the front, and it really has really focused light, and it's based on an eyeball, but instead of taking in light and producing vision, like having vision, it is doing the sort of reverse paradox of that. And it was used in the performance. And this is a brass instrument based on the ear, like inner, middle, outer. And you can see it has like a kind of a cochlea, and it has these let me show you, there's a chamber. It's a chamber sort of mid instrument that holds these 3D prints of the vocal tract, when for each vowel, like A, E, I, O, U, and thinking about vowels as the thing that forms speech from utterance. So and this was called the R horn. And it's just this idea of like sound. When does sound become speech, and when does speech become sound? And thinking particularly about the history of trumpets and brass instruments as often being kind of like stand-ins for vocality or for the voice. So, and it's just a whole interesting technology that I went down the wormhole with, which was when they're trying to create synthetic speech. It was all about like having the shape of the vocal tract for the vowels. So I found that interesting. And then once you came in, there was also, and turned around from all of these objects, there was a video installation, like 2 monitors, and you had to kind of sit in the middle, and you kind of quickly realized that the middle, that it was one stage with cameras facing one direction from behind the audience, and then other set of cameras facing from behind the performers. So it, in one other way, it puts you back on that that fourth wall, or that separation between audience and like the participants, or the audience and the performer. And it was, there's also a cane, you know, so you can whip someone off stage right behind the curtains too. And this video installation was an event that was called from this performance called the Rocky Horror Opera Show. And I just called it that. It was a project I did with a friend of mine who's an opera dramaturg. And we thought, like, okay, we'll just have, we'll have 4 singers, a pianist, and we'll have them play like sort of the best of, or the most known arias from opera. And we'll dress the audience up. I made like 100 different costumes based on like what's happening in the aria. So it's like rich people, poor people, Carmen, a bloody bride, you know, the sort of a sad clown. And then we invited an audience with no idea what would happen, just like, hi, come to this performance. And it was sort of great. This is what the 2 screens look like side by side. I can show you a little excerpt of this. Oops. Okay. Yeah. Isabel doesn't believe in my technical abilities.
No, I'm sorry.
Hey, most of the time, it's not true though. So I get it. Okay, so this was the video documentation. I'm just going to start a little bit in.
Should I put it on the mustache as well, just in case?
Oh, terrible. I'm looking like Betty Davis now.
Are you ready to wear a costume?
I'm the Carmen girl. Oh, so you know.
Oh,
All right.
we need to get you the pom hat. Other one, great. Do you feel like Shakira yet?
I can. You're the Carmen girl. Help. Make me cry.
Everyone weirdly. Everyone's very overpaid at this point. It gets a little more chaotic. No one knew. All I just said was, you can do whatever you want. I'm really harassed her. Where is it going to be? Yeah, there it goes. But this was for me to study like what an audience does. Okay. Where is... Anyway, you can watch this online if you all want links. It's very entertaining to watch people realize that they get to go near professional singers. I will say that.
And did you invite them and say we have costumes for you?
Yeah, I said you don't have to do anything, but strangely, they all seem to want to. Okay, this is gonna be the one problem, Isabel.
Is the little bar on the bottom?
It's me and the little bar on the bottom, but I'm gonna make it through. I'll persevere. And this was a really weird audience where I've been doing interviews with people who were. I've been thinking about this idea of connoisseurship or care for like cultural connoisseurship in particular, like caring and connoisseur being someone without professional attachment who loves and cares for an art form. So and I've been interviewing like people in these music societies who were like knew everything about opera or knew everything about ballet. And thinking about like that love and that care is holding the memory of art forms, like what we do, right? And thinking about how amazing and special that is to like not have any sort of professional relationship to something, but to care about it and to hold it and hold the memory of like different performances and pass that down. And something that I think of as being utterly queer in many ways in terms of its like non-biological reproduction of meaning. And this was sort of a great thing. So he was in one of the recorded music societies, which was like opera fans. And he came, he's great. So then after that performance, I put all of the costumes in the back of the space, because the space of the new museum is the top floor, and it's very weird. Like it feels like a closet. So I was like, let's treat it like a closet, you know, that just is always a problem with exhibition design. And that towards the end of this, my time there, you can recognize that light. I had written something, you're writing this performance, which ended up, it was called Here as well. And it ended up to be 23 parts in 2 acts, and I terrorized 6 performers in the production of it, who, well, they're amazing. But they were constantly like, where are we at? So you can see the set list on the wall, because I was like, well, this is not it's a kind of not a black box, but a white box in the basement of the new museum. And I just I thought like, let's just show all of the elements of a performance. So you can see like the cane in the background, you see the light, you see this curtain that goes up, can be held up. Here's the 23 parts. Here's the straight player Kelly Pratt playing the aura horn. And then this is another section where 2 of the performers are interviewing my dog about her sentient consciousness. And over here, hit the sleep. We can watch a second of this. I loved this. Was a performance it was the first like sort of large scale performance I did, and it felt really. Okay, this is another section. It's from a
Mountain
business
metaphors have a number of advantages over the sports metaphors of baseball and football, commonly used in business today. As we have noted, the summit of a peak is one of the clearest and most powerful metaphors for achieving a goal or objective.
The flexibility of mountain metaphors makes it easier to formulate win-win approaches to cooperative business ventures.
Although climbers can compete with each other or the mountain, they don't have to.
I think it's clear from our
And that is a chorus built on G8 speeches. And then afterwards I was asked, like, I don't know, maybe like I think 9 months later, asked to do like, do you want to be in this show? And it's about destroying an artwork. So I was like, destroy an object. And so I was like, oh, I know what I'll do. I'll ask all the performers back to the same space and ask them to try to remember that piece, and shot it on 2 cameras. And I said, we're going to shoot it. We're going to do 1 take. If you don't agree, you're going to have to work it out on stage. Go. And they missed entire sections of it. They were kind of like, it was so deeply entertaining, like this relationship to like how performers hold information and also remember and work together. It was really, really fun. And that piece really started my love of like collaboration and working with performers, and I can spend the whole day talking about that. But I'm not going to. So not long after that, or I guess it was a few years later, I got commissioned by the SculptureCenter to be in this show called The Eccentrics, which was based on FX, which was a sort of post a Russian post I guess it would be post-Dada group that was about absurdity as valid meaning. So for the show, I was working on and starting to think about work on another show, and I was like making this in the foreground you see this speaker. It's a terracotta cone, and it has a tactile transducer attached to it, which is like a kind of speaker that whatever it's attached to, it creates that, it makes like the material body its resonant form. So if you put a tactile transducer on a window, it turns a window into a speaker, or the table into a speaker, or anything like that. And then I was like, I really want to, I'm thinking so much about this abstraction of like what we do and images. I was doing all this research on copper and thinking about conduction, like conduct as an ethical act, but then also conduction as moving information through material, like everywhere. Everything in this room is, like the lights, being able to do this is all based on moving electrical impulse through material. So I ended up making a 3D video with 4 of the performers from the past work, and the piece is kind of about like them building the objects that you see in the space, and they move from building the objects to like, and it goes from everywhere from like smelting the copper, pouring it, hammering the copper wire, and then building the speaker cone out of terracotta, and then they end up in a recording studio, doing these kind of like speech ads. So, and it was like 3D, so you'd wear, it was active 3D, so you'd wear the glasses to watch it. There's the speaker, which I also ended up doing a performance here, and I flipped. Any speaker can be also a microphone, so I ended up flipping the line and using this as a microphone and playing it with mallets, and worked with the 4 performers. This was another object I made at that time, thinking about, and this was called Seeing Being. And it's a 3D sandstone print, UV with UV, and it's a 3D scan of a hand that's then separated and made into an anaglyph, which, if you know 3D, like the simple 3D technology is like the cyan and red, and they're slightly separated by the width of your eyes, and when you wear the glasses, like the red and the cyan glasses, your vision reunites, kind of simple way to say, reunites it to give you a sense of 3-dimensionality. So I wanted to make something I think about a lot, is like making objects that are in some ways like the most simplified version of the idea. So in this case, I was like, let me just make it and pull it apart, but it's actually a 3-dimensional object, but it's been produced through 3D modeling, and then it was so interesting because people would be like, do I need to wear glasses for it to be 3D? And I was like, it is 3D. It's a thing. So it was, like that, but that kind of conundrum is something I really have been curious about. This necessitated doing things in Rhino and the platter, and then leads me to the next project, which this was a show at the Hammer Museum in Los Angeles, and it was called Conduct Matters or Conduct Matters. So we think that play of like, is it about like conduct or movement through materials like conductive energy, or is it about a kind of ethical question or a musical question? So you see at that point the speakers there. There's this stage. It's kind of like a raked stage, but it's the platter from Rhino, but it has kind of forced perspective. Like I was starting to think about stage design more. So it goes from about, I think, 3 inches in the front to the back corner is, I think, almost 11 inches. And the lines go, like there's the lines in the weaving go from being like about 1 foot in distance to being close to like less than an inch. And that sort of did a forced perspectival field. And I went back to weaving, which I hadn't done since I was really young, but I was thinking a lot about weaving as an act of computation and a kind of logic of computation. And so this piece was about 10 by 10 feet, and it was called my God, let me remember the name of my piece, Perspectus Aum, which is like perspective. Perspectus is Latin, perspecta aum, and it's like it's declensions like masculine, feminine, neuter in Latin. But I also liked it as like this kind of like aum, like this slide through discomfort about like this rigid structure. There's also, you can see a 3-channel video happening there, which was like a really great piece to make. I've worked with 4 of the performers from before, and I had them, I'm going to skip this. We don't have enough time. You could watch it online though. And it basically starts with them in a cave and one of them sort of splits off and is trying to understand connection, and the other 3 are constantly trying to pull her back into connection. And it ends on them building an alternate grid on the roofs of Parsons, where I used to work, actually. So you see them kind of stringing line and trying to reconnect with her. And then this is the vision. It's the Matterphone is the name of the speaker, and then the monitor is called Ground, kind of a play on electrical grounding too. And it's connected by copper wire. You see, and this is thick. I did this residency at Urban Glass, which I loved. And it sort of distorts, it's like another lens on top of the monitor. And the monitor has all of these things, like it has some connection to things in the room, to the video, the 3-channel video. And whenever there's a hand, either like a mouse or an actual person's hand moving, you hear it through the speaker. You hear like the movement of that sound. If it's like click or like a hammer or anything like that. This is just one image. This is trying to put that grid into a mine where I actually shot part of the video, the 3-channel video. And you see that copper wire, which I just wanted to show connection as opposed to obliterate it like we do in the rest of the world. And then as I do in institutions, I sort of had my institutional creep where I think at the Hammer I did a residency. I did these sort of work in progress performances that were very fun, as a part of their larger program that they were doing. So like there was like 150 days of feminist production. And then I did a performance, but I also ended up doing these light boxes in the courtyard of the Hammer, which, you know, is that amazing, you know, LA and Latin American style open air courtyard. And then at the end of this project, I had made this thing which I called breath lung, and it produces, it's kind of like a lung where it produces sound, both analog, but then it also has temperature sensors in these hand-blown glass lungs, and I sort of implanted temperature sensors in there as well. So and then the lines would go to these two performers. One, Scott Kazan, is a sort of a digital, or he's a data composer, and then the other was an old sort of prog rock rocker who had like crazy pedals, and he took the analog sound, and is this sort of division between like digital information from the breath and the breath as a sound that we experience in the world. And as a part of this, I worked with this amazing vocalist, Sharon Kim, who's an amazing artist in her own right, and Rachel Higgins, who is a sculptor who you don't see here, but she built the screen, she built this, like, put the stage down, sort of like sets everything up and takes it down. And this performance was called Breathe in the World, the Problems with You, Me, We See and Hear. And then another show, this is in LA at Commonwealth and Council. You see that stage has come to live. It's like a linoleum tile stage, and it's a raked stage, meaning that it in theater, like the stage at an angle, so you know feel like you're closer to the performers, or it's foreshortened space. And the 3D video, and then the sculpture. I made the sculpture for the show called Zalarab, which is the opposite. It's like a reverse spelling of parallax. And parallax is like an astronomical term for like when it's the distance of a moving object in a solid in a stationary object. But Zalarab is the relationship between two moving objects, and we just love this idea of like this aperture of the body, of the belly button, and this kind of movement from the interior and the exterior in the world. And it's painted to look like an anaglyph or a 3D object. And that's cast in my body and painted. There's a 3D video. And there's this the lung instrument, and it has different size sort of long attachments that can go into it. Let's see, there's a little bit close up, so you can see the temperature sensors, how they're implanted. There's one in front of the mouthpiece, and then they're implanted in there. So there's 3 streams of data. And then the show was called Can You Feel It? I was interested in this idea of how do you feel sort of being a body in the world, was my initial idea. And I ended up like at the last minute making this piece out of a conch shell where it has a little transducer attached to it. And, you know, obviously it's attached to a little small amp. You see the copper wire, and it's playing this house music, Mr. Finger's house music classic, Can You Feel It? If you all don't know it, I'm sorry. So you kind of go up and listen to the shell, but instead of listening for the ocean, it's like listening for this, like, you know, being a bit of a house music aficionado pre-Beyonce. Like it was this idea of like hearing something like really soulful and strong in place of the natural world, or just making a relationship there. There's a cute little lamp. And then another piece in the show is called Breath Studies. I made a few of these, and they're glass, like hot glass that's blown at the same time, like the red and the cyan, and then blown when it's hot so that it fuses together, and then kind of hung with wire. I was thinking about the idea of these two forms of breath, but also like an anaglyph, so something between like something you can't, holding something you can't see, or showing the shape of breath, and this idea of vision and form. And then after this project, and I did a book for that whole, like after the Hammer project primarily, but it also includes some images from the Commonwealth and Council show and the performances. I did a book, which I was so excited about, so exciting to do a book. And then right when it came, like right after it came out, the pandemic started, and it was sad, you have book parties and things you want to do, and it was like, boom, nope. So I got this invitation from the kitchen to do one of these online events, and I really learned how to use Twitch. And and I did like an online performance and book party, basically, or it was sort of about working with the performers to do parts of the performance of the two performances we've done, and then I would just show different screens of information, but it's also very located in the time. So if we watch the video, it'd be like, hi, my name's Jeanine, I'm sitting in my studio and I'm on Zoom with 3 performers, and I'm trying to it's like things like that. I'm trying to manage all of this technology I just learned. And so it was really fun, because usually like Twitch is like gamers, and I don't know if you know it, but I feel like I hacked it into another life of different video sources. So always gotta move with the challenges. So that was actually pretty fun to do. And this piece I did a couple of years ago called Cave Machine, again with feeling. And I was thinking about, I just had this idea of making this object that like produced light, but you could not see into the interior. I think I'd gone to Philadelphia and gone to the see the Duchamp piece, Étant Donné. I don't know if you even know it, where you look through the little peephole. It's like permanently installed there. And it's all about the peephole, but in this case there's a peephole, but you can't really look through it. And it's like I made up this kind of this cave, and I think this idea is kind of an entombment that seems almost intentional. And I had blown these glass lenses, which really distort images. So you can see that this is an image, it's a 3D image of a projection of like a tsunami wave wiping out, in this case, the Pacific Northwest, which is part of this research I was doing. And I just wanted to make this machine that was producing something like externally, but it is an object in its own way, which is something I think about a lot, even with the instruments in the previous projects, like how objects have more than one life. They have a sort of a visual life, like in the case of that horn that's based on the ear, it has this visual life sitting in an exhibition, but it also has a life of being played and used and having air move through it and producing sound. So this is a little bit of a sidebar. This is a project this is kind of more moving into being in Rome in 2024, 25. And I asked to, when I was there, I wanted to go there to research the technology of vision since the Renaissance, and the effects of the Renaissance on sort of Western ideas of vision. And a lot of that I was researching Sebastiano Serlio's architecture and his sort of treatises. And it's funny because I was reading this treatise on architecture and perspective, and looking at his designed for theater, which like created from like Greek open theater to, we call it, when they say theater of war, often when the Roman generals would come back from their kind of imperialist pursuits, they would build a theater, and they became more and more enclosed and almost like an eye in the world. And this was just, I was thinking about this and had found with my partner this sort of rotting copy of the book from probably like 1600, and it was no longer a viable book, so we pulped the paper, and I made these different kind of perspectival planes. So instead of thinking about a piece of paper as a flat, 8.5 by 11, it became these sort of perspectival shapes. But you could see the flecks of the old paper inside of there too. And I was thinking about like the material of that knowledge, or that path that we've gone down culturally that's become global, and this idea of shape. And this is another project I did in Rome, called In Plain Sight. And I did these videos of people's eyes, like sort of extreme close up, and I wove, I did I wove this like 14-foot long strip that went from about a foot wide to, I don't know, a quarter of an inch wide, and I would cast off. So in weaving, there's the warp, and then the weft is what goes back and forth. And so I just kept weaving towards the wall. And then I was like, as I was doing that, which took quite a while, I was like, oh, this is, and I was making this kind of forced perspectival line that was decreasing in its width to give a sense of distance. I was like, oh, this is so interesting. It's about eyes. And then I was like, well, look, I think I'm just going to shoot these eyes and have this go kind of into the pupil. And so I wasn't sure what I was doing at first. You could see my weave, and you could see the warp is what's falling off, because I would cast it off as I went. And this is from what is called it's a backstrap loom, and it's basically just a few pieces of stick. And it's a really old technology, weaving technology, that was used in different forms around the world. Deceptively simple, always a problem though. So, if you mix one thing, like screw one thing up, everything goes. It becomes a problem. This is just sort of the weaving process. And it was also a way, I was like, I just need something to do with my hands as I think, which I think a lot as an artist. There's always like a thing I do, which gives me the time and space and framework to just think and be like, think through a problem, which is probably familiar to many of you. And then this is another piece I made there. I met a classicist, and her Kate May Brazel, and her specialty is like Greek sophist period humor, and which, when you go somewhere like the American Academy in Rome, you meet these specialists that are so deep into their zone. It's kind of, you just want to talk to them about things. So I was like, so who are you reading? What's happening? And she was like, I'm, researching Lucian. And she was like, oh, I really like these dialogues with it was called Dialogues with Courtesans, like basically sort of instead of like dialogues as a philosophical exercise between noble men in ancient Greece, it was like a kind of a play on that, but with sex workers. And so I was like, oh, cool. Then I was reading online, and I was like, oh, interesting. There's these two that haven't been translated, and one is called The Lesbians, and the other one is called, I can't remember what it was called, but it was basically gay. And I was like, fascinating. Always great to find the gaps in history. And so I figured out a place. I found a translation of The Lesbians, And I was like, this is kind of amazing. This is two, they're called heteri. They were like sort of highborn, they're probably highborn foreign women who had been like conscripted into slavery. So they were they were interlocutors with wealthy men in the Roman Empire, but also prostitutes. And so I was like, I had a great idea. What if I put the speaker for each of their voice in the American Academy? There's the portico, and there's all of these amphora, which is like how like oil and goods were moved around the ancient world in the Mediterranean. And it's just like this practice of like from the 19th century of like showing the ancient world. So I was like, what if the voices, like each of them, each of the two women in this dialogue took a voice here and there. It's so coy and funny. Because the one is like, tell me about what you were doing with like this woman Clinarian. It's like she's like she's like the women of Sappho, and so it goes on and on. And it's maybe I could just show a second of it, but okay, there we go. And speaking objects is a term like in ancient Greece, there was idea of objects had an ability to speak, like they had a kind of an agency in this strange way. Okay. Fun to show setting.
I've heard a queer thing said about you, Leanna. People say Megilla, the wealthy lady from Lesbos, is in love with you, as if she were a man, and that I can't explain how, but I've heard it said that the two of you couple up just like... What's the matter? You're blushing. Is it true then?
It is true, Clinarian. I'm ashamed. It's so strange.
In the name of male fertility, you must tell me about it. What does that woman require of you? Exactly what do you do when you get into bed together?
Oh, God.
Now I'm sure that we're not friends. If we were, you would not think of hiding such things from me.
We are friends, Clinarian. I love you more than anybody else, but this is such a strange matter. I am so ashamed. That woman is so terribly like a male.
I don't understand. Do you mean to say she is one of those man-like females of Lesbos who will not suffer in their beds the company of men, but prefer to find pleasure instead with other women as if they themselves were men?
She's something like that.
In that case, Leanna, tell me everything, please. How did she seduce you in the first place? And how was it that you let Megilla have her way with you? And what came after? Tell me everything, please.
She herself and another rich woman, similarly trained, Demonassa from Corinth, were organizing a drinking party and had taken me along to play the music. When I finished playing and it was late and time to...
It goes on and on. But you can see, like, it was really fun to do a direct translation too, where you're like, in the name of male fertility. I was like, male fertility? And then she was like, yeah, that was considered an important thing, like that, And so it was really fun to just take the translation and put it out into the world and be like, oh, weird, all of these conventions around gender that actually continue for quite in terms of like, but in this case, I would say this is a form of satire. And so like even in the original dialogues, it was satire, which is kind of amazing to look at, like the ways that someone was poking in the ancient world at the power structure and how it still has a relationship to what we are doing today. Okay, let me get out of here. What's that? Okay. And then I sort of intimated about this. The current project I'm working on is I've been thinking a lot about tsunamis and the geology leading to tsunamis. I grew up in the Pacific Northwest, and I've been thinking a lot about like what are the uncontrollable things that happen in life, and this very it's kind of known that there have been tsunamis and there will be tsunamis in the Pacific Northwest. There's this plate that it's the Juan de Fuca plate, and it's slowly going underneath the North American plate, and it will cause more tsunamis as that shrinking happens. They've happened before, and it wasn't until the mid-1980s that through like Western scientific rational knowledge that it was admitted that this has happened and it will happen again. Even though you can see sort of traces of it in the landscape everywhere. So in my lifetime, there's been all these attempts to try to mildly help people have some sense of safety for what is unknown and what might be like I think it's kind of incomprehensible. So in some way I've been thinking about this idea of like, how do we handle the incomprehensible? And it kind of coincides with like a lot of death in my family in the same region, and having to think about like what is incomprehensible in living is dying. And thinking about this idea of the tsunami as that as well, but also as a public health question, and as something that like to see how people react to these things. So I just been conducting interviews and but trying to think about building work from that. So these are just some things I just recently shot. This was a choir of 8 people and 2 musicians, and I had written the libretto for this. Is this song is kind of like in the form of a Greek chorus, singing about tsunamis in the region, and they're out on this jetty into the Pacific Ocean. And I worked with a really great composer I know who writes beautiful lyric, it's a 4-part harmony too. And this is community members on the coast of Oregon. And then I shot this, it's a ghost forest where like 300 years ago, there was a tsunami, and basically this area dropped, I think like they say about 12 feet. And this was a site where these geologists were like, yep, it's true, it happened here. Where it's this site of like, okay, we are verifying that tsunamis have happened. And these cedar trees that are still standing are now submerged, I think about 12 feet up. But it's kind of very marshy, and I went there 3 weeks ago, and shot with a friend, and I had her be on a wobble board as I interviewed her. So she's kind of wobbling as we go. This is just like other people I've interviewed about what their plans are, if they knew something was coming, like a wave was coming. So that's all kind of in progress. It's fun to show things in progress, and it feels like a departure, yet not. And I'm still kind of making sense of it, and I'm actually writing a performance, which I'll do a version of this summer. Under pressure, that will happen. So that's coming from a lot of the transcripts and things like interviews I've been doing. 402. Okay. I like to show this project because it's something that's also an ask to an audience, or an invitation. I've been a part of this project Photo Request from Solitary since I think 2012. And it started in 2009 in Southern Illinois, around this prison called TAMS, which is a supermax that was entirely solitary confinement. And a friend of mine in a collective group that I was somewhat part of would do things like send poems to the people there. And finally they were like, great, we like the poems, but can you help us? And so then that started this like real advocacy work on the part of the TAMS Year 10 campaign. And the campaign's goal was to close the prison in 10 years, which they did. And so one of the tactics was to this idea of asking people what they wanted to see when they were being held in extreme confinement and sensory confinement, and find someone to take the image for them, in some cases make an illustration or something like that, and then send it back to them so they got what they wanted to see, but then also so those images could be made to humanize people who were being held in conditions that they wasn't a part of their sentencing. It was often, it's just a complete misuse of power on the part of the prison system. So people wanted images of themselves because they'd never seen any images other than their Department of Corrections images. They want to see themselves out in the world. This is an image that I took, or I made for Robert. And a lot of times, like solitary confinement is where people with mental illness are dealt with, which is an extreme form of torture. It is an extreme form of torture. Like the international commissions have been very clear that anything more than 15 days causes intense duress in anyone. So someone who has a mental illness is even more seriously affected. While he was in solitary confinement at Tams, he really wanted to, his mother had died, and he wanted to make this kind of memorial to her where, she's in front of a castle with a Hummer and money on the ground. And he sent out a picture of his mom. So these are just some other images. And we have a website which is called voterrequestfromsolitary.org. If you all want to go there and look at some of the requests that are still open and fulfill anything. And we've done them in first in Tams, then we did campaigns in New York and California. So in New York, we were supporting the Halt campaign, the Halt Solitary campaign, which was passed. And the state of New York has found ways to try to inch around it, but it limits the amount of solitary confinement to 15 days. And in New York State. So it's like we really try to support the campaigns that are going with the work. So someone wanted in New York, he wanted an African American family. Imagine why. Someone wanted a picture of Donegal in Ireland. And these are what we ask people. We have these forms and we ask them forms. We usually show the forms too. They're really beautiful. Like to see how someone writes about what they want. So someone who was arrested when they were 17 and has been in prison for over 30 years. So, wow. Yeah. This is one that no one has ever fulfilled. For Kiana, I can't remember his last name, but yeah, he wants a photograph of liberation. And he's a really important advocate in California. And who's in solitary confinement, obviously. So yeah, please take a look there too. Okay, that's it for me.